The Seventh Tower by Garth Nix. Book 6, The Violet Keystone. Chapter 12. Tal climbed wearily out of the hatch and fell onto the kitchen floor. It had been a longer climb than he could have imagined, much farther than when he had climbed the Red Tower. His hands were raw, blood mixing with the grit, and one shoulder was caked in the foul-smelling residue that had come flying down the shaft when they were about halfway up. Fortunately, it had been cold. Crow was sitting close by, his face pale, obviously even more worn out than Tal. Adris was sliding across the ceiling, trying to get as far away from the odorous slop-down as he could. Unlike the kitchen they'd left so far below, this one was still in use. Fires burned under many pots, and there were even some old sunstone-powered hot plates that glowed yellow and red with permanent heat. A breeze constantly blew through the kitchen, taking smoke and cooking smells up into the holes in the ceiling. There were benches laden with fresh ingredients being prepared by the Underfolk cooks. Tal saw bellish root, cavefish, shrimps, orange and red yarrables, blue mushrooms, and more. Enough to make him remember he was hungry. All the Underfolk were gathered at the far end of the kitchen, clearly scared by these garbage-encrusted intruders who had emerged from the slop-down hatch. Tal raised his sunstone, and it flashed violet. Instantly, they all turned back to their allotted tasks, ignoring the unexpected arrivals. "A flash of light, and they know who's master," whispered Crow, but he said it without the anger that would have been there before. He just sounded sad. Tal looked at the stacked crockery on one of the nearer benches. It was all of violet-colored crystal, confirming that this was indeed a kitchen on one of the violet levels. "Where do we go from here?" asked Crow. "How do we get into the Violet Tower? I hope we don't have to climb the outside of it." "I'm not sure," Tal admitted. He knew very little about the Violet Tower. He remembered being taught that it was much larger and higher than the other 6. But he didn't remember much else. He had seen the topmost part of it briefly from the Red Tower, but it had been the farthest away, and he hadn't been able to make out any details. "You must have some idea," continued Crow. "I have one idea," said Tal. "I'm just not sure it's a good one." Crow looked at him expectantly. "Well," Tal began, "the Empress must have been able to get into the Violet Tower. And there's a children's puzzle song that might have something to do with it, only I can't remember it properly. It has a line that goes, 'The first sat here, the second spied here, the third flew here, the fourth ate here, the fifth was born here, the sixth sang here, and the seventh grew here.' All I can remember of the answering part is that the first was an emperor, the third a bird, probably a crow, I guess, and then it ends with the seventh was a tower. And here was the audience chamber, which has the imperial throne in it. Only, I don't know where the audience chamber is." "I know who we can ask," said Crow. He slowly got to his feet and looked at the Underfolk, who were keeping their distance. "If the Empress ever ordered a drink or food, someone from here would have taken it to her." "I guess so," said Tal. He got up too, ignoring the stabbing pains in the muscles of his arms and legs. Crow singled out the most senior Underfolk, an old cook, and started to talk to him. Tal tried to stretch a bit, to ease the stiffness that he knew would come along sooner or later. He was tired, his weariness made worse by the after effects of the water spider poison. He didn't really listen to Crow and the Underfolk cook until Crow called out to him. "Tal, come and hear this." Tal pushed himself off the bench he was leaning against and walked over. Above his head, Adris glided across the ceiling. "Tell him what you told me," instructed Crow. The Underfolk man bowed nervously. He obviously didn't know what to make of Crow, and he wasn't absolutely sure about Tal, even with his sunstone and spirit shadow. "As it please you, masters." "Don't call us masters," Crow interrupted. The cook bobbed his head several times and cleared his throat. "Yes, as it pleases you. The audience chamber and the imperial throne are not used. Haven't been used by Her Highness, not these many years. Well, never, I think, as my parents told me. But it must be cleaned from time to time, said Crow. Everywhere is cleaned. The cook shook his head. No. The doors cannot be opened save by the Empress. In my father's time, under the old Emperor, the doors were always opened. I am sure we cleaned it most thoroughly. It is not neglect, masters, not at all. I am sure the cleaners would be very happy, most ecstatic to clean the audience chamber again. Can you show us where the doors to the audience chamber are? Asked Tal. Can we get to them through underfolk ways? I am assigned here, said the cook nervously, casting an eye back over all the other underfolk working over the fires and at the benches. I cannot leave, but I could send one of our waiters, if it please you, masters. Stop this master and if it pleases you stuff, said Crow, some of his old anger returning. You'll be free soon. The Iceclaws have invaded the castle, and will win. The Chosen are losing. The cook trembled at Crow's words, and didn't answer. The confusion in his eyes was clear enough. He had only ever known one world, and could not imagine it changing. A waiter will be fine, said Tal gently, as long as he knows the way. The cook bobbed and nodded and hurried off, calling out a name. I hope the doors are still closed, said Tal. Why? Asked Crow. How will we get in? I'd forgotten that the Empress never had the violet keystone, explained Tal. Merker, the old Emperor she deposed, managed to escape with it. He died in the heatwaves, and that's how we got the stone that Ebbet split in two for Mila and me. So? I bet you need the violet keystone to open the doors to the audience chamber and get into the violet tower. That's why the doors have been shut since Merker's time. If they're open now, it means Sushin has already used the half he stole from me to get in. Crow nodded thoughtfully. What do we do if we run into Sushin? He asked. I mean, if he's still there. Hit him with everything we can, said Tal. You can do a red ray of destruction, can't you? Yes, admitted Crow. Even though he was an underfolk, he had stolen a sunstone and had been secretly trained by Ebbet and Lector Jarnal. Then do that, said Tal. There's a spell I've been meaning to try on him too, if I can do it. The Violet Unraveling. What does that do? Asked Crow. It dissolves anything it touches, Tal answered grimly. I only wish I'd been confident enough to try it on him before. The cook came hurrying back through the kitchen, dodging the workers as they moved between stove and bench and swung open ovens or sharpened knives. A young underfolk boy, no more than 6 or 7 years old, trailed after him, surreptitiously picking his nose. He stopped when he saw Tal looking at him and whipped his hands behind his back into the approved posture of a servant. This is Adol, said the cook. He will show you the serving ways to the audience chamber.